Hello, everyone, and welcome to another VSM Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Krakowski, joined by Goran Vazovic.
Hello, Daniel. How's it going?
Very good today, because today we have an extra special, exciting guest. We have Elizabeth Dickinson, who is running for mayor of St. Paul. Welcome to the podcast, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Yes. I mean, again, welcome. And you were the second person. I know we had Dai Tao as the first one. So I appreciate you accepting our request to, join the podcast. And the other three candidates haven't responded or accepted. So it shows a lot, you and I, to actually, be part of the community, engage a local business, and to talk about kind of what your cause is and why you're running for mayor. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I always try to do what I say I will.
Yes.
And one thing we were talking about in general, too, is when we were at the Pioneer Endicott building, and everyone was kind of giving their elevator pitch on what their goal was moving forward with the city. You really were one to provide a lot of specifics, a lot of actual plan of action, as opposed to some of the more boilerplate language that tends to be used in a lot of these political campaigns, hitting the things that people want to hear. It's not uncommon to hear, hey, I want to help small businesses. Hey, I want to help people in need of help.
Right.
But getting to a how is, I think, where most politicians drop the ball a little bit. And, I think we just got a president based on that type of language, that type of rhetoric. So it's good to hear that, you're actually have some specific plans in place of what you're trying to accomplish here.
Thank you. I appreciate your picking up on that, because I feel that it's really important to get beyond generalities. I mean, I know that there's, how can I put it? You want to be cautious about what you can achieve, because, of course, once you get into office, there are always a lot of things pulling at you.
Right.
And situations become a lot more complex than they might look, from the outside. At the same time, I think that the voters deserve to know some specifics that you would really champion and that what you really care about, because otherwise I think you could get into office and just be pulled in a million different directions. And frankly, I appreciate when people are a little bit more specific about what they'd like to try, even if it changes when they get in there.
Yeah.
We'd like to, you'd like to know some specifics about what you really would love to do and what really excites you. So
absolutely. And the how in business and anything where you're trying to, where there's multiple variables that you're trying to wrangle to create some outcome, that's really what separates the result at the end of the day, is the method of execution and performance. So we had a chance to speak a little bit here before the podcast started. And you had 3 items that you were kind of putting as top priority for your run here.
Sure.
Would you mind sharing that with some of our audience?
Absolutely. First of all, I'm the green endorsed candidate, so we're always concerned about social, economic, environmental justice, grassroots democracy, and nonviolence. Those are some basic values that we operate under. The areas that I think that I'm different from the guys, the number one I would say is probably energy and environment. Mm-hmm. There's one other candidate I think who will talk a little bit about it in some kind of specificity, but frankly, I think if I hadn't been in the race, we wouldn't be talking about it. And I don't just see energy as in terms of climate change as a moral or climate imperative. I actually see it as a source of economic opportunity for us. And there's specific things that I think about. One is that the solar and wind industry, according to Fortune magazine, is growing 12 times faster than any other industry in the United States. And that's incredible.
Unsurprising.
That's incredible, frankly. And when I was talking about this, I've been very consistent about talking about this. And when I ran 12 years ago, it was still a little bit like, oh, that's kind of on the outskirts. That's kind of fringy, maybe, to be talking about that. And I was talking about it as economic opportunity even then. Well, the world has kind of caught up to that.
Yeah.
I mean, China is, I think, the number one manufacturer of solar panels at this point.
Yep.
The things that I'd specifically like to work on, partly through the Climate Action Plan and partly through additional initiatives, is getting solar on the schools. And I want to be clear, St. Paul under Ann Hunt's leadership has done a terrific job in terms of going after energy efficiency. And I know that the city has recently made a commitment to put solar on 25% of the municipally owned buildings. I think the solar on the schools represents another opportunity. I went to a friend of mine who does solar installation, and I said, what would it cost to put solar on the schools, and what would be the payback? And he said, get me a list of the school addresses, and I'll go on Google Earth and I'll analyze it.
Right.
And so I have a real specific proposal from him. It could bring $7 million a year to the school system in energy savings. There's ways to do it, which I think will be familiar to people who are familiar with solar, that are actually, there's no upfront cost to the school by leasing the space. There's a better payback if they own it.
Yeah.
There's a much better payback, but it also means an investment. But if you lease the space, you will still be doing some good. And, I've talked with teachers that say, oh, we're learning about solar in school. It would totally be aligned with the curriculum to do this. It would bring over 400 jobs, full-time jobs during the installation phase, and then there would be, 9 to 12 jobs to maintain it and that kind of thing. So I think it would be a total win-win.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at it, I mean, obviously for St. Paul, it makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And I think when you look at the way that we all speak about global warming as a society, it's
especially now recently with the.
I know it's pretty amazing to me. I mean, I think you can approach it from the hey, we should preserve the earth and have a long-term view of, but if you go back historically, whoever's controlled the dominant energy source du jour, going back to the Industrial Revolution, going back to the Portuguese and the triangular sail even maybe.
Oh my, you are very well educated.
Right? Then that's been the dominant nation. That's been the superpower at the time. And the fact that we are allowing ourselves, due to, I must say I do know a few lobbyists in the oil world. I won't say specifically where, but anything that I guess my opinion is a lot of these companies are owned by people who are very, very close to retirement. People in their 70s.
Yes.
I think probably know one example, but if they're not as concerned on the long-term view of what it's going to mean to us as a nation, state, city, it's really difficult to want to continue going down that path. Whereas, realistically, I think not only do we need to start accepting alternative energy sources, but we need to be catching up to a lot of other nations in it. We need to be investing more.
Absolutely. I've talked with some of the solar installers here, and, I'm glad that we've had made in Minnesota rebates. But, the Chinese are so far ahead of us at this point in terms of, and they've just done it in the last 4 to 5 years.
Yeah.
In terms of manufacturing of solar panels and stuff like that. Yeah, we've got one solar manufacturer, I think, in town. We've got a wind manufacturer for the gearboxes in town. And there was at least a couple of years ago, one of the solar manufacturers in Minnesota, I think there are 3 total, had said that everything that they can make for that next year had already been promised. Mm-hmm. So, the demand is just huge for this.
It's there. It boggles my mind that it's a divisive issue, because I think a person cannot care about the environment at all.
Exactly.
And
Just
still
financially.
It makes sense.
Financially.
Yeah, so,
because once you have them, the fuel is free forever. You're
Right.
not digging something up out of the ground. You're using what is totally free in society, the sun and the wind.
absolutely.
And the battery storage has gotten so much better. My husband and I have solar on our home, and we've been getting 97, 98% of our electricity for the last year, and it's net metering, so it's attached to the grid.
Yep.
So it runs forward when, when we're generating. It runs backward. Runs backward when we're generating, and forward when we're taking. But it averages out to almost 100% of our electric use.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people's issue with it at this point is
I think it's
they're unsure that the technology is where it needs to be at this point.
It's not just the cost, but it's the you don't know. And I'll be the first one to admit it. We actually have a rental property. It's a duplex that has solar panels on there.
Yes.
And we bought it, and we were just kind of standoffish, like, how much is it going to cost? What are the repairs?
Right.
How does it actually work? Is it
Right.
actually going to do what it says? So I think the education is a big part, or lack of education. If you kind of, let people know that you can have a battery pack or battery wall inside your
Right.
home, plus the solar panels where you can, eliminate your bill.
Right.
Maybe even make some.
Right.
Most people can't even comprehend that, or they think the cost is just too great, which I don't think it is
the
anymore.
cost has come down so tremendously that literally, if we put it on, the same stuff that we put on today that we put on 10 years ago, it's come down by like 2/3, and it comes down all the time. I've been door knocking people that are going, we thought it would be really expensive, and then we got it and went, well, we could do that.
Yeah.
So it's coming down a lot.
I think we're waiting as the public maybe for some intersection of lines between cost and perceived efficiency and the value that it's going to actually be able to provide for you. But at the same time, if we want this technology to flourish and we want to be able to catch up to other countries that are investing very heavily into
Right.
it, I think the onus is on, certain institutions that have the capital available to make that investment, even if it's not maybe perfect and completely mainstream yet, to continue to put capital into these companies that are generating this technology, to incentivize them to continue the acceleration as well.
I think putting the capital in, and then also having, I know there's a rebate on a federal level, and then also on the state level. I think, maybe on the city level, you mentioned that you wanted to put, kind of lead by example. So putting solar panels on roofs of municipal buildings, schools, et cetera. That's a great step, is basically, hey, let's invest the taxpayers' money into this so they don't have to,
Absolutely. And there's another way that it benefits the consumer. I don't know if you've been following the community solar, but even if you're an individual who doesn't have either the money to invest in solar, or you've got the wrong roof placement, you've got trees shading or something, community solar enables you to have a subscription to like a local church that has solar, or a school. I mean, that would be part of my plan, is that you could sell subscriptions, and it saves money from the get-go. You buy the subscription, it saves money from the get-go, and you're getting your percentage of energy that you're using from, someplace that you can see, your local church or your local school.
Yeah.
And that's another way for individuals to get into it. The other thing that I want to just have a brief shout out is for energy efficiency, because that is still the best way to save energy. And the St. Paul Port Authority has done tremendous work with businesses. They've got a commercial Minnesota PACE program, and they were really smart. When the $200 million stimulus that came during the Obama administration, the portion that came to St. Paul, some of it went away into one-time kind of investments, roads, whatever. The St. Paul Port Authority had some for energy efficiency, and they invested in a revolving loan kind of program. And they've been doing tremendous work. They've got something called the Trillion BTU program that they started getting going around 2009, 2010. They are halfway to having helped businesses save 1 trillion BTU a year.
Wow.
which is tremendous. And I would really encourage you to have somebody from the Port Authority to come in and talk about that program, because I think, if you've got folks who are listening who are into commercial properties and they want to know how they can get a piece of this action. I think it was Madison Equities, they're saving $1 million a year in energy costs over 3 buildings.
Wow.
So it's huge. It's really huge. And the way they've structured the program is that you don't pay anything on it until it is actually installed and saving you money. They've set the program up that way. And they've gotten folks like Travelers Insurance to put up money, because they've actually negotiated, you'll really appreciate this, so that if there's any kind of default, the payback for the energy efficiency measures takes precedence over the mortgage on the building.
Wow.
And that's how they've gotten people to invest in it, for low interest loans, because it's like, oh, this is rock solid.
Yeah.
I definitely want to hear a little bit more about that, or who to contact, because we have a building that we own right across the street called the Bonnie Jean Building. The address is 212 East 7th Street.
Okay.
So there's 4 stories, and obviously we have roof, and we definitely want to see what we can do as far as solar panels, LED lighting. I know we already have some LED lighting in common areas.
Yes. Well, I'll I think it's Pete Klein. I think it's Pete Klein, but I will get you his contact information to talk with him.
If you can get me that contact info, that'd be great.
And I would just like to make a little shout out here. One of the things that I think I'm really good at is finding what is working in the community. And one of the things I think that a mayor can do is to be a connector of the resources in the community to the businesses that need it, and also a convener to get all of the great minds together so that more people know about what's going on, and you can start to find out innovative solutions or resources that you don't know about in the community.
That's really good, because us being here for the past 7 years, we've had, zero support, or we feel like we have zero say and support of what's happening, which is crazy to me.
That is crazy. And I mean, that's something that I would like to fix. I would like the resources of City Hall, and some of it is informational. I always say, in terms of the budget, I'd like to redirect our resources back into neighborhoods and things that directly affect people, like Parks and Rec. And in terms of the city budget, I know there's some hard choices coming in. I know we need some infrastructure improvements. There's all kinds of things that we're going to have to deal with. But one of the things outside of the actual city budget that the mayor can do is, again, connect people to the resources they may not know about.
Just even this one tidbit right now, it's going to save us money and huge.
That seems like the big disconnect right now, perhaps.
Yes.
There are great programs out there already. They exist. Yes. It's just, who knows about them? How do you find out about them?
Yes. And there's another developer in town that I can put you in touch with, and they've made a real commitment, which is tremendous, to putting solar on rental properties and solar on their new installations of affordable apartments.
Gotcha.
And those are people for you guys to connect with, to see if it would work for you.
Who's that developer?
There's Besant.
Okay.
Is one of them, and they're doing some really great work in terms of what they're doing, with a real commitment to it. And they just say you can do well by doing good. And I really believe that there are a lot of businesses and business owners out there that have that orientation, and that all they need is the connection to the kind of expertise that can help them realize those types of goals, as well as the people that are already doing it.
Yeah.
Because you're not always rivals, you're colleagues as well.
Right. You're
developing your own properties, and you can learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I'll jump into before we get back into top 3 list here.
That's right.
But I want to share, just for context too, Elizabeth is actually a landlord herself.
Yes.
And has experienced, a lot of what we do and a lot of what our listeners do
and what we
as well.
talk about too a lot.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just really quick for our curiosity and backstory, how did you get into owning rental properties?
Well, that's really interesting. My mother, who's unfortunately passed on, she actually owned my grandmother's house. My mother was English. My grandmother's was English, and if you'll let me take a short story. It was very interesting because my grandmother did not have a lot of money. She was a widow, and my mother's aunt, who was one of the first female physicians in England.
Okay.
We're talking about the 1910s.
Awesome.
And she wanted to become a doctor. She did become a doctor. She never married. I think her fiance was killed during the First World War. So we're talking.
Oh, man, yeah.
Yeah. And she really liked my mother because she thought she was more of a career woman. Mm-hmm. And when she passed on, she left her some money. The bank manager thought that she would probably invest it in a car or something like that, instead of which she bought her mother a house because she didn't have one and she wanted her to have that stability. So the house was always in my mother's name. She rented it out when my grandmother died, and then, it was getting to be too much just owning this small property. Mm-hmm. So eventually she sold it and she made the money available to me. And I, at that point, did some investigation. I was working at the Minnesota AIDS Project as their community affairs manager, and they had a wonderful matching investment program. And I talked with the investor at that point, and I said, is it better to take my money and invest it in the stock market?
Right.
Or is it better to invest it in rental property? And we did the numbers, and it was pretty clearly rental property if you were willing to do the work.
Right.
That was the case. That's the thing. If you were willing to do the work, and one of the things that I really appreciate about owning property, I have some pension money, from places I've worked that's in the stock market, and I just kind of leave it there. But what I love about owning rental property is you can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it. You don't feel like there's funny stuff going on. You have direct control about what happens. It's not being impacted by people you've never met who are investing in things you might not approve of.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's just this sense of more direct control. And I also believe that it was a way of contributing to my neighborhood. The things that I have bought are in my zip code, and some of that is to minimize aggravation because I'm a very hands-on manager as well as owner.
Right.
And I want to be able to be there in 5 minutes. And I also feel, because I've taken over, from that first thing that I bought at the height of the market, unfortunately. Uh-huh. I took a year, and it was a good bargain at that time, but I actually bought at the height of the market, and it hasn't, kept up to what I paid for it. Mm-hmm. But the two others I bought were at the bottom of the market, and they have, incredibly increased in value, sort of making up for the other one. So, you can't help what the market is doing, but you can just be as savvy as you can in buying.
My first property that I bought just over 10 years ago was at the height of the market, 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
And I had a choice. Okay, do I just call it quits with one, or do I, just keep going and buy a bunch at a good rate, and still save that property? Which obviously what I did, and we still have that property till this day.
Nice.
But the best thing you can do is if you have the time, it's going to fluctuate. The housing market and the real estate market, it's going to.
But it always bounces back and comes back, and that's one of the things that I think is important. And the other thing that I think is important, because in my neighborhood, I live on the west side of St. Paul, which is the most economically and ethnically diverse neighborhood in the city.
Yeah.
And there was clearly no particular urban planning, because I literally live in a block where kitty corner is like an old mansion from the late 1800s, and I'm next to a 1950s Rambler.
Right.
And I'm in a 1911 kind of urban cottage kind of style. It's all over the map. But if you own in your neighborhood, you really care about it. You're not an absentee landlord.
Right.
And I know that one of the properties I took over was on the verge of, really tipping over into slum territory in people's minds. It was actually not bad inside, but it hadn't been kept up on the outside.
Yeah.
And, people say they did a double take going by, because by the time I repainted the outside, made sure, that things matched, put some window boxes on it, and people are like, holy mackerel, it doesn't even look like the same house. And people feel better because it frankly, it deters crime if it looks like it's a neighborhood that's taken care of.
Definitely.
And so I feel like I'm contributing to my own personal neighborhood by, keeping these buildings up, and by providing a service that people really need, because I'm renting it slightly under, I think, what the market rate is.
And we love that too, because I think typically, and I'll use the city of Minneapolis as an example, there tends to be a very adversarial relationship between landlords and the city.
I've heard
and
that.
St. Paul, going back, 6-8 years, there is a giant lawsuit that got escalated up to the Supreme Court, essentially about building inspections.
I know there was a big thing on windows and those, and making them egress windows and...
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
But it's, realizing the fact that you are a landlord in and of itself means that, you're not going to necessarily think all landlords are terrible people looking to oppress lower income people, keep them in rent, as a renter
Absolutely
forever.
not. Absolutely not.
And that, I think that's really important to us. That's really important to our listeners. And, when we see a slumlord out there, it bothers us just as much as it bothers everyone else, because we go out of our way. If there's an issue, we're going to upgrade, we're going to over renovate any property that we acquire, and then same day we're going to try and get a washer dryer goes out, we're going to get someone out there immediately and have it taken care of.
Right.
And I think a lot of landlords do have that same mentality and really view it as trying to build the neighborhood, because again, you can look at two different motivations. There's that intrinsic motivation of, hey, I like to help people, but also a better property. If the neighborhood continues to appreciate, that just further secures your investment as well. So
absolutely.
That's one of the reasons why I got into real estate, and I know Ryan did as well, where, I don't have any stock market holdings or anything. So everything that we do locally or within our community is what we are all about. So, we consider, obviously the entire metro area, but also St. Paul as
your home,
as our home and our entire neighborhood. Like you mentioned, you wanted to improve your one house on your block because you had a certain sense of pride in wanting to just make it better. That's how we feel when we go into any one of these properties, wanting to just make it better, not to cut corners, just quickly turn it and just be done with it. We want to make sure that we provide quality housing for people that need it and want it, and then if they want to rent for a certain amount of time, great. If they want to if they want to be a homeowner, we can help them with that as well. So we love turning good or bad properties into something great, and that certain sense of satisfaction you get after a job that's done. It
just makes you feel better because it's just visually it just looks better, and and I always said I tried to buy things that I would live in, and it might have been at an earlier point in my life, but that I wouldn't feel badly about living in, frankly. So that's a motivation for sure.
Right. So sorry, that was kind of sidetracking more of my personal interest, but so we covered the fact that you're a landlord, and it sounds like a pretty darn good one at that. We also talked about what you want to do in terms of renewable energy sources as well. Could you maybe go through a few other
priorities?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Please.
So I'm also a big supporter of the 15 Now campaign, which is to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour over the next 4 to 6 years.
Okay.
And I want to make sure that there are protections for small business in there, because you don't want to be putting out small business and mom and pop stores for sure. But the studies that they have done in Minneapolis, when they said, how would this affect Minneapolis if we did this? And the studies came out and said it would raise 71,000 families out of poverty.
Wow.
And what I say is there is absolutely nothing that I could do, and I support things like obviously affordable housing, and I support things like increasing transit, but there's no one other thing that I could do that would have a deeper and greater effect in improving people's lives. And we've got 25% poverty in St. Paul at 100% of poverty. If you raise it to like 175 or 185% of poverty, it goes up to 40%, that 40% of our population is in poverty. And so although they haven't done a similar study in St. Paul, you can figure that if it's going to raise 71,000 families in Minneapolis, to do something similar in St. Paul would have a similar kind of effect. And we do have this stubborn poverty, and I think we have to address it because, to quote Paul Wellstone, we all do better when we all do better. And for... Yeah. And so I think we need to take that attitude. I think socially, environmentally, emotionally, financially, it's going to make sense. And the people who need that money the most, frankly, they spend it in the neighborhoods. It's not like they're holding on to it. They can then, pay for their groceries and they can pay for their rent and all of those types of things. So I'm a big supporter of that. The final thing I talk about is just generally about government, which is making it more transparent, responsive, innovative, accessible, and diverse. And I can unpack what that means specifically to you. Transparent can be anything from the fact there was a big kerfuffle over saving emails. I don't know if you heard of it, but
I haven't. No.
Okay, well, there was a big kerfuffle over saving emails, and the city wanted to get rid of city-based emails after 2 years. And a lot of people said we should keep them longer. It's not a storage what if you want to investigate what's been going on and you want the trail? You need to have those emails. That's a piece of the transparency. Responsive, I think I've talked to you about, the fact that I try to do what I say. I responded to you when you you invited me in. I also believe some of the city council people have a great program of going out into the neighborhoods. I know Rebecca Knacker, my city councilwoman, is out twice a month for coffee meetings that anybody can come to, at a coffee shop. And then a second time in a month where she's at, a restaurant or a brew house, for like another hour and a half, 2 hours. And she advertises them. They're on her website. Anybody who wants to can just come, hey, I'm wondering about X, Y, or Z. What are you guys doing about that? I have an idea. I think the mayor should do that too. I think the mayor should be present. So that's part of being, I think, responsive and accessible. Innovative is solar on the schools for sure, but trying to think outside the box. When we meet together as a city, I think we should be asking who is not at the table with us that we need to have at the table, and really think about incorporating that, and partly that's for good policy and partly that's because that's what you're supposed to do, I think.
Right.
And diversity, I'd like to see the city get closer in its hiring to 40% people of color. We actually live in a city that's 40% people of color. And believe it or not, our school system now is 75% kids of color. I don't know if people know that.
I did not know.
75% kids of color. So I think it's really important in hiring. I think it's important in, that the city reflects this diversity. One of the ways I think we can do that, certainly for entry-level jobs at the city, is by looking to see if there's a mismatch between the kinds of qualifications we're asking for and what the qualifications you actually need to do the job. So let's not ask for a 4-year degree if you don't need it to do the job. And that makes it more accessible to underserved communities of color, to kind of get their foot in the door, is what I would say. At higher levels, there's also, I think, challenges in keeping people of color in leadership positions, people who've already achieved that. And the Bigelow Foundation has been doing a 4-year study and working with different communities to come out with some recommendations. And I would love to integrate those recommendations into the city. So those are some real specifics.
Yeah.
As I said, I would try to be very specific with you,
right.
In terms of some of the things that I thought we could do to address these things. So that's kind of a nutshell version of what I'm interested in.
That makes a lot of sense. So my question always with integrating people of color into any type of trying to get them more represented in certain industries is how does that work? How specifically do you implement that? Because that's always its own challenge, right?
It is its own challenge.
One thing that she mentioned that kind of it's about the requirement, for example, the higher education requirement. If the job doesn't, really need that or require that, then why have that as a stipulation to get hired, which would give or open up the door to a lot.
Oh, I'm loving that.
Yeah, me too.
There's that. The other thing that. That I know they're starting to do, because Kristen Beckman, who's the deputy mayor, told me is, one of the things they're trying to do is not just advertise the jobs on the city website, that she's challenging people to go to at least 3 community papers, community newspapers, in places where there is diversity so that people know about it. And one of the things that I actually did, and again, this goes back to the mayor being the convener and being the connector, at the Pioneer Endicott mayoral kind of forum that we had, I met a couple of gentlemen there who said they're trying to hire in a more diverse way, but they're having problems. Well, the next day I was at the African American Leadership Council, and I said, guys, I have a couple of cards here, business cards, from people that say they're having real difficult finding candidates of color for jobs that they have coming. And I have to tell you that there was practically a rush at me from people who were like, and I said, well, I've only got the cards. And they said, one of them said, the leader basically said, hey, you give it to me. We're going to make copies of that, make sure everybody gets it.
Yeah.
So I really believe that the mayor can make those connections for people and facilitate the way.
And that, if that can be the way that it's consistently done, is it's just, hey, for some reason, these communities aren't intersecting enough, and they're not in communication enough to hear about job openings, et cetera.
Right.
That'd be fantastic.
One thing I was going to bring up is just the accessibility. Obviously, we're real estate company, but that relies on technology and social media, right? Connecting people, everyone's on it. City of St. Paul does have a Facebook page, for example, which I follow, and I follow other, and I see what they post. And there was a job posting, and a lot of people do respond to it, which is fantastic, because immediately within a minute you can have the reach that you can with any print medium.
Right.
And just current stats, right now there are just over 23,000 people that like or have notification from the page. But something that's concerning, which the city doesn't really combat, I guess, is the 2.8 star rating out of 5 stars.
Oops, on their Facebook page?
On their Facebook page, that no one even responds to people's concerns and comments. Also to mention that I gave a 5-star review. But there are quite a few that just they don't get answers, which to me, who has the position of social media within?
I don't know that there. I don't know who's in charge of that, but that would be a really interesting thing, because it's one of the things about social media is that it's worse to have a presence or a page than to have no page at all if you don't have somebody responding.
Right.
Right.
It affects your reputation.
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. And certainly for millennials, and frankly, a lot of people, you can't just. I door knocked an 89-year-old the other day who's all over social media, so you can't make assumptions.
Yeah, right.
You can't make assumptions that just because of age, people aren't tuning in. But the thing that's always been made plain to me is that different types of social media reach different types of audience. And if you're going to be represented in all of those, then you really do have to have somebody monitoring all the different kinds of social media.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I remember, this is some time ago, but I think in the last 6 months or so, they were talking about CEOs and LinkedIn versus Twitter. And what was very interesting to me is that there's always one type of social media that is predominant for each person. Like nobody is equally active on all of those.
Right.
So you really do need to tailor your social media menu to make sure you're reaching people, because you probably are reaching different people.
For sure. And
Yeah.
you know, I think the larger your organization gets, the more value, especially for something citywide, if they're hoping for a lot of engagement, is to have someone who does focus on that a little bit more too. I know
Yes.
I'm starting to go that way with my assistant.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to walk out for a second. But so do you know, somebody does monitors their position, but...
You know, I don't know. I mean, I've looked at, you can look at the positions that the mayor's staff has, and that often tells you what their priorities are. And I think there are 10 or 12 people with different titles. I know like there's an outreach and marketing person, but there's not somebody that's specifically business.
Right.
And I know there's a Vista person. So you can go on there, and I doubt that there's anybody specifically that only does social media. So it's probably incorporated in different
I've seen,
things.
like I said, the other cities that we follow, especially if we have rental properties, I definitely follow those cities and those municipalities to see what they're talking about.
Right.
Again, going back to how important it is, and even our podcast here, well, it's not broadcasted live. Our audience, consumes this on their iPhone or
Right.
Android phone, whatever, on the go. So if most of the population is on social media, you may want to have that as, the number one priority for your community outreach, and to actually address some of the issues publicly when you do have a negative review. I know we do on a company level.
Right.
And other cities do as well, where if a citizen that has a concern, says something, that it's addressed, or there's actually a way that it gets handled versus just saying, oh, it's just on social media.
Right.
When in fact, it's such a big thing. Even though 24,000 people might not be huge, it's still a fair amount of people that get to see any updates that come up on that page.
Right. It's always tricky because you don't know if they're from inside the city or outside the city.
Right.
Right. Well,
yeah.
Well, again,
And
going back to social media, you see their first and last name, so their profile is very.
Right.
It's displayed.
Public.
It's public. It's for everyone to see. So you can't hide behind it.
No, not on Facebook. On Twitter, I think it's a little easier. It's
right. It's a little easier.
Yeah.
It's different. So
Yeah.
Well, so really quickly then, just going back to
Yep.
trying to bring people of color back into the workforce and have them represented at the level in which they're represented in the community.
Right.
That's something that we're pretty passionate about as well.
What steps are you taking?
So we're working with Cookie Cart right now.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that charity?
I am not, but that's okay.
Really?
They will be coming
Okay.
to St. Paul soon. They have how's that fundraiser going for them?
So we actually have been part of a couple meetings. They're just $1 million shy of completing their fund. But Cookie Cart is an organization that was started by a nun maybe 25, 30 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And it's basically an organization and a business in itself, where they create a structure, and there's one in North Minneapolis where underprivileged youth can actually have a job and earn a wage while making or baking cookies, but then also have classroom-based training on soft skills,
Right.
Resume creation,
Right,
a lot of things
right.
that
Right.
are lacking in our education
Right.
system.
Right.
And the director, Matt, he actually has been here for the podcast, and they're opening up a second location in St. Paul, and that's where the $1 million shortfall is there in order to be raised, so this structure can be built, and kids can engage from the local community.
I wonder if they were working at all with the unions. There's a baking union, there's a bakers union.
I don't
because
know.
that
It's a good
would be
question.
that would be a interesting, because obviously, if you get into the Bakers Union, there's a pathway to living wage jobs for sure. And I wonder if they're at all involved with the Right Track program, which Parks and Rec does. That's one of the things I'd like to see expanded. Parks and Rec told me there were something like 500 slots, and I don't know, 12 to 1,800 kids applied for them. And it's a program that's done with the business community, Parks and Rec, and it gives kids from underserved neighborhoods, frankly, job training, job skills, internships that are paid over the summer.
Yeah.
And
sounds similar.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, again, I can connect you with Matt and to see where they're at and how you can be a part of that. I know the current mayor is involved in some way, yeah. In some way, and I know when the grand opening, I believe, is scheduled for April 2018.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's underway, and they have a lot of good organizations behind it, but still, again, they're not a huge charity or organization. Like I said, they have one location, and now they're opening their second one. But I think the benefit they provide.
Where are they based now?
North Minneapolis.
Okay, all right.
But the benefit they provide to the kids, and we've had them, we've had open house events, and we would invite them, so they would have a table with a couple of kids. Cookies would be there for people to get for free, and then they would get donations. We, as a company, order a box of cookies on a monthly basis. So when we have a new tenant move into a property, they're greeted by a box of cookies from Cookie Cart VSM, and there's a card that basically says, "Hey, help us raise money for this organization. This is why it's important," but also the cookies. So it kind of helps us. From a customer service perspective, it welcomes people home, being a tenant, but also makes the tenant aware of a bigger cause and how they can contribute to
that's
it.
Great.
So,
yeah.
And moving forward, though, and kind of the reason I brought it up in general is what we're really passionate about. And I guess I'll speak for Gorn here. I don't know if this, but what I'm really passionate about is getting and helping people who don't have maybe that financially successful role model.
Yes.
Getting in front of them and showing them some of the methods and strategies that we use as entrepreneurs to create and build something for ourselves. A lot of our school system isn't really geared to that. There's not really a lot of personal finance management. Like that in and of itself is sorely lacking in public schools, and entrepreneurship in general isn't something that's really touched on. So any way that, in your endeavor to help bring that up, if there's ever anything that we can do to contribute to reaching out and helping educate young people, showing them internships, whatever it may be, we'd be more than happy to be involved in that too. So
just real quick, the site that they bought and what they're renovating is 946 Payne Avenue.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, and
I think I know what block that's in, I think. So, okay. All right.
They're coming,
pretty close to
and
the
they're
city
going to
count.
be a permanent kind of fixture here
awesome.
in St. Paul. And again, it's what I like to call cookies for a cause.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah, I was at the High School for Recording Arts for a candidate forum that the kids had organized last week. And we had a World Cafe. I had suggested rather than we all sit up in a line at the front, and answer all the same questions, where we all end up kind of sounding similar and you don't really have an exchange, which is much more interesting.
Right.
So we did just a little bit of that. And they took my suggestion, yay,
Nice.
which was to break into different groups and just have us rotate, each of us with a different group, and then just rotate every 10 or 15 minutes. One of the young ladies there basically said, one of the things she was really concerned about was financial education. And I thought, wow, you don't often hear that.
Right.
But she said, they wanted to know about how do you sign a lease agreement? What should you be looking for? How do you balance a checkbook? How do you be concerned about your credit score? How do you learn about those things? And that she wanted a practical, hands-on way to do that. And there's somebody else who said that recently to me. And I know that decades ago, that was a part of public education, and it seems even more urgent today
Yes.
because of online stuff and because credit scores, which nobody really knew about, now everybody knows about, and they're critical in making decisions about who you rent to and everything. So
Right.
they need to know about that and care about it.
Absolutely. And I fear that the part of the reason that we don't hear about it so much is that so many people
Are making
don't know.
money off of the people that don't know.
Well, not even that. I just think that the people who don't know don't even know what they don't know, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
so they
I
don't
think
know
that's
what to
right.
ask for. They don't.
Right. Right.
We see that firsthand, and from when a tenant goes from being a tenant to a homeowner.
Yes.
A lot of times when we engage, or when one of our agents engages the tenant, they're unaware. They're like, "Oh, I didn't know I could be a homeowner. I didn't know this was available." So that's kind of it sheds a lot of light where we think something like that would just be quote unquote common knowledge. It really is not, and we see that firsthand from the people and the customers that we help.
Yeah, I mean, there's I have actually said to tenants, you realize that you with the rent that you're paying, as long as you can get a down payment and your credit score's okay, that you might actually be able to become a homeowner. And it doesn't benefit me to tell you that particularly. I don't
Right.
want to lose you,
Right.
but you should know that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think we take the approach from you mentioned everybody in their life. I'm still a tenant. I obviously own homes, but it doesn't matter if one tenant's like, hey, I want to go into home ownership. Doesn't mean that you can't provide another tenant. The next step in their life is to have
Yeah, absolutely.
tenancy as part of their residence, and then next they would go into home ownership. So
Yes.
we basically just we try to take the approach of like, hey, where are you at within your life, and where are you looking to go, and to see how we can help you. If renting is the right thing to do, great. If home ownership is the right thing, we can help.
Right.
So I think it's
right. Not everybody wants or needs to be a homeowner.
correct.
And you have to respect that. But there are people that it would provide a degree of security and a way of building up equity long term.
And it's certainly good, regardless, to know
Yes.
what your options are,
Absolutely.
what the pros are.
That's what we want to convey to everybody, is really the empowerment of knowing what your options are.
Yes.
And just general education. Hence why we have podcasts here that talk about everything real estate. A lot of things I don't know. We have a gentleman from Belt Bank. He has an office here, and he's like, hey, you can really get into a home, 3.5% down, right?
Yep.
Most people didn't know that, and those things change every month.
I have a kind of cute story about someone calling me and asking me about a question they didn't know.
Yeah.
I got a phone call, and this, I'm assuming, younger woman was calling in and had a question about a single-family house for sale, just a regular house. And I pick up, and she's like, hey, I've looked at this street address. I just had a quick question. If I bought this house, would I be allowed to have a cat? And I'm
Oh
like-
my goodness! Oh my
I'm like-
goodness!
I go, yeah, you'd own it. It'd be your house. You can have a pet. She goes, okay, thanks, bye, and just hung up. That's all she needed to know.
Wow!
Right.
Wow!
Right.
So that was an
Wow.
eye opener for me, just realizing everyone's at different levels of understanding
Exactly.
of different.
No, and sometimes they've said in the city, they've been surprised. I talked with the public works director, and they were concerned that during snow emergencies, especially in recent immigrant communities, that a lot of cars were being towed because people didn't understand about the snow emergency and that they needed to get their car off the street.
Yeah.
And she talked about going in there, and they thought, okay, we're on this. We're going to go in the summer. We're going to sit them all down. We're going to talk with them. And then she said it made, we showed them the apps. We talked about the email. We talked about where they can find the information if there's a snow emergency. We did all of that. And then she said it made not one single bit of difference. And you know why? They didn't know what snow was.
Oh,
I mean, it's like you
Yeah.
have to take 10 steps back sometimes, and realize
see it from someone else's view.
you
yeah.
have to see it through somebody else's view.
Yeah, I mean the cat story, it sounds very drastic from what we regularly hear, but still, I mean, that's somebody that's, maybe they're a tenant and the pet policy or cat policy was such for many years. So they just assumed that was the norm, that there's actually like you can't.
That exists in the world.
That
That's
exists in the world.
Federal law.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's something that I think, you were just speaking to, is you really have to take, 10 to 100 steps back.
And it really, and if I can pay you one more compliment here, it really sounds like you have, and that's really how you're approaching this whole campaign, and what you're trying to accomplish as mayor is really, inhabit not just, I think, a lot of people hear Green Party and they say, yes, of course she's going to be able to
Right.
look at, people below the poverty line and
Right.
understand their situation and try and make that better. But I definitely feel, as a sort of personal endorsement, that you've come in and seen what we're doing as a business as well, and see from our perspective as well, and then are finding ways to bring the two together to be able to make some progress for both parties. And that's really great. So
Yeah.
Thank you. I
agree.
appreciate that.
we thank you so much for being here. We don't want to take up too much more of your
All right.
time.
Well, thank
but
you. Yeah.
I'm sure people are going to want to check out your website. What's the best way for them to contribute to your campaign and learn more about what you're trying to accomplish?
ElizabethDickinson.org.
Okay.
It's pretty easy. If they want to donate Dickinson for mayor,
Perfect.
we've definitely got a PayPal account online, and if they want to know more, just go to my website. There's a way to reach me through email, and Elizabeth, they can send an email to Elizabeth@elizabethdickinson.org. It should reach me, and
We'll have the links to your website and also a Facebook page within this podcast, so people can click and link right away. And then when we post it, I'll tag you and your page in it, so you'll have access to it,
Awesome.
and people can actually
Yeah.
engage ASAP as they're listening. So it's going to be pretty
absolutely,
easy.
I'd love to. Yeah, any links that you can give me, I will pass along through email and Facebook and my website and stuff.
Yes.
Fantastic. Elizabeth Dickinson, thank
Yeah.
you so much
Thank
for
you.
Thank
being
you.
here. Good luck
Appreciate
in the
it.
race, and
Thank
thanks for
you.
listening, everyone.